I want to talk about permissions in SQL Server. Permissions is a pretty complex topic, and I won't be able to get into everything regarding it, but I just want to go over a few things, a few principles regarding permissions. So basically, permissions can be used to keep users from looking at certain tables or altering data in certain tables, things of that nature. So what I want to show you how to do is set up some users and then assign some or restrict some permissions for them. So first part is creating the user. So I've got Management Studio running here. To create a user, it's going to be under this security area. So usually when we open Management Studio, we go into databases and start looking there. But for the users, we want to expand security, and they're actually called logins. So I'm going to create a user, I'm going to right click on logins and do new login. There's 2 or 3 things we need to do here. We need to give them a name. So I'm just going to do a simple name here. That'll be my user. More than likely we want to choose SQL Server authentication. So we want to click this radio button. Let's assign them a real simple password. I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. And in the production environment, we might enforce these, but just for simplicity's sake, let's uncheck these boxes. So I gave them a name, I chose this, gave them a password, and unchecked that. One more thing we need to do to create this user is give them some kind of permissions. Otherwise, they'll be kind of useless to have a user. To do that, on this dialog, go to User Mapping over here. And then you would give them access to a database. So just to do this example, I'm going to give them access to a couple databases here. And again, we could get into some more advanced principles here, but just for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to click the database and then give them DB owner access. I'm going to give them access to this database also. All right, so user mapping, give them some access to a database, then you can hit OK to create the user. That's the first step. Now the second step is assigning some specific permissions or maybe restricting some. So again, for this, we're not going to get into detail on everything, but I want to show you a couple examples. One would be, let's say for this user, we only want that person to have access to certain tables, not all the tables in those databases. And the second example I'll get to will be maybe even restricting access on a specific field or column. But let's restrict the user's access to a particular table. So we've created the user, and I've given them access to this database down here. But let's look in that database. I've got a couple tables in this database. So let's say, for the sake of argument, we wanted them to see this table but not that table. So the way to do that, right now they can see both because I gave them access to this database. So if I want them not to be able to view this table, I'm going to drill down into the database, find that table, and right-click on it, and go to Properties. So this is still assigning permissions. We've created a user, we've given them some permissions, but this is assigning more specific permissions. So I right-clicked, here's the property page for that table. And I'm going to click this Permissions tab over here on the Properties. Ignore this user. We're going to do a different user and do some stuff with that. So when you do this, you may not have any users here. That's fine. So I click Permissions, and what you want to do is, for the users, do this search and find that user and sort of add them, and then you can assign permissions. So I'm going to click this search button here. Yeah, the easiest thing to do from this dialog is to hit Browse, and your user should show up if he has access to this database. So let's select Bobby, hit OK, and hit OK on this. What I want to do, again, for this table, I don't want this person to have permissions. So what we're actually doing here is sort of withdrawing the permissions to this particular table. So I'm going to click on Bobby, and I'm going to check deny in all these boxes. And then hit OK. So we'll test this in a minute, but now if we were to log in as Bobby, he should still be able to see this table, but he shouldn't be able to see this one or view the data in it based on those permissions we just assigned and sort of withdrew. Second example I want to show you, which is could be pretty useful, is restricting a user or a group of users' permission to a particular field. So maybe we want to allow them to see a table, but we don't want to allow them to see a specific field in that table, just all the other fields. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Once again, it'll be done similar to what we just did. So I'm going to go into this database and find the tables. And for the sake of argument, I'm going to say I want the user to be able to see a couple of the fields in this table, but not a specific one, like a social security number. So once again, right-click on the table, go to Properties. Pretty much the same thing we just did, but there'll be one important difference. So I'm going to click Permissions, search for Bobby. So hit Browse here, check that box, hit OK. So this time around, what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign a select permission, which basically means Bobby can select or view the data in the table. So the way to do this, click on select down here, and when we do this, this button becomes usable. So notice it might be grayed out, but if I click select here, now we're going to actually assign some pretty specific permissions. So I'm going to click this column permissions, and I'm going to say grant on these two fields, but not on this one. So I'm going to say deny on this one. All right, so I checked grant for the fields I want Bobby to be able to see, review, and deny on the ones that I don't want them. So they could be 2 or 3 fields each, depending on what table and fields you have. Hit OK on that. And that's it. Just hit OK on this as well. So that's it. Really, what I've just shown you is creating a user, assigning some permissions to the user, and then restricting some permissions for particular tables or for particular fields or columns in a table. But just so you see how this works, so feel free to look back at that. But to see how this works, we just show you what happens if we log in as Bobby. Hit disconnect here. And I'm going to log back in as Bobby, just so we can test this out. And see if his permissions got taken away or if he can see certain things and not other things. So let's test that first one first. Let's go in and see if he can look at one of those tables but not the other. So if he clicks on this table and tries to look at it, notice it gives a permission denied error. So basically that person, that particular user can't view that table, but notice he should be able to still see this one. Right, so we've assigned some permissions to restrict certain stuff in our database. Let's try that other one out just so you can see how it works. Let me go into this database and run a quick query. Just for the sake of speed, I'm just going to let the thing create the query for me, and then I'll modify it a little bit. So right now, it's trying to look in that table at all three fields, and it's getting an access denied. So what I'm going to do is modify this to say, okay, since this is Bobby, maybe he is just going to be able to see these two fields, but not that third one. So let's try this. And notice now, for this particular user, they can see certain fields, but not others, based on the permissions that we applied.